Recording in progress.
Good morning, everybody.
Nephews. Oh, I lost. We said even if I won, I was gonna buy them too.
Of course.
Oh, we're going to Lucille's on Thursday.
Was it good? Oh, you haven't.
This Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mark, why were you talking to Christopher?
I'm going to, he's converting me.
I'm sure.
He's,
What do you get if you cross a Jehovah's Witness and Episcopalian?
what,
Someone who knocks on your door but has nothing to say.
yeah, that makes sense. Oh, man. Hello. Hello. No, we definitely have, no, we're doing a thing, together, or, I mean, we're both offering blessings at, Pilar Schiavo's holiday party. So he asked if I would say something. I think, we hadn't spoken before, so it was just nice to meet him or talk to him and just let him know that, yeah, I hope, you know what I said to him? I said, listen, I can only, we didn't talk any specifics about, what, what's going on, politically, or, his feelings or whatever. But I said, because we talked about how difficult these times are right now. And I said, listen, for me, I know where kind of my community wants me to be and what I have to do. I said, you've got a challenge, because you're getting pulled in lots of different directions. And, as a progressive, church leader, there's a lot of different competing things and a lot of voices and a lot of different, I mean, for me, it's not easy, but it's a little bit clearer. So, and he said he really appreciated the fact that I understood that. And look, like I said, we did not speak anything about what he feels or what his message. I get the impression that we're probably on slightly different pages on a lot of stuff, only because he said he's pretty much taking his direction from the Archbishop of Jerusalem, who also represents, as you know, Reverend Lynn, Jordanians and Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinians in other places, and Syria. Yes, all of them. So he's got the Archbishop of Jerusalem. It's a tough job, I got to say. I mean, I can only imagine how tough that job is. So, yeah, it's so there is a church, there is a, what is it? What's it considered? I don't know, but it's an ancient, it'd be an ancient church in the sense of, trying to connect with Christianity from its homeland. So, yeah, so I know there's going to be a representative of the Muslim community, myself and him. So we'll see what happens. That's next week. I told him, yeah, I never thought in a million years I would have been dealing with some of the questions and dealing with some of the things that we're talking about right now. But anyways, I'll let people know. I'll keep you up to date and keep you awares of what's going on. I hope it's a peaceful and
Can't imagine that it would.
inspiring holiday season. Yeah, I mean, not just there, but I mean, everywhere in our community, I hope is going to be. We're going to keep it positive, but yeah, I mean, we're worried about security like we haven't before in the past, which is weird, but who knows? I mean, I mean, I don't know.
It's just a terrible time.
Yeah.
We have
But-
our menorah out in the window.
Yeah, I'm glad. Look, it's not so much I'm worried about someone's home being attacked, though. That is definitely a possibility. I'm worried that somebody's going to take, opportunity for us to celebrate Hanukkah at the mall, for example, and come and start screaming stuff. That's what I'm worried about, because it's happened. It's already happened. It's already happened a few times.
Oh, it's how it's too damn early.
Too damn early.
No, it's the same.
Next year, next year, as you know, it's very late. It starts Christmas, the day of Christmas. So next year, we're like the latest you can be. So yeah, we're a little,
That's the latest.
the latest it can be. December 25th, we start.
Right, too.
Yeah,
It's a little bit this.
yeah. It's following the 25th of Kislev, which is 2 days from now. And we're gonna have
Well,
stuff
tomorrow,
all over the
you're in
place.
hopefully there, okay.
I hope so.
Anything there?
No, I don't think so.
I have an observation.
Ronnie,
I have an observation or a question.
yes,
One die fell out of your pocket about 2 minutes ago.
yeah.
Why would you have dice in your pocket?
Yeah, because we roll dice here on the weekends. So no, not only is there a dice, if my pocket had further, there would have been a chip. No, we had, no, exactly. It's my lucky chip. No, we had a poker here.
Who was the
We
big
had,
winner?
we had poker here on Sunday.
Who's the big winner?
I don't want to say. I was, but we went out. I did go out. I did go out on a big one. It was ridiculous. It was a ridiculous hand, but yeah, we knew it was the last hand, so everyone kind of pushed in, and so it was a little unfair, I guess. But I legitimately won it. I had an open-ended straight, and I hit it on the turn, and then I got another one of the. Listen, I'm just going to tell you since you asked. The final hand, because everyone said we're going home. It was 9:30. My brother-in-law was playing. He had pocket queens. Another guy was playing. He had pocket fours. And I called. I had 10 jack. The flop came out. It was queen, king, four. So this guy had 3 fours. This guy had three queens. And I had an open-ended straight. So whatever, I was fine. I mean, I was not great, but and sure enough, the next card was an ace. And the next card was a 9. So I had a 6-card straight. So I felt it was definitely a sign. But yes, it was a funny way to go out. And we wrapped it up. But yeah, we dropped a couple chips, and we had a good time. We haven't played poker probably in about 5 years. And so it was nice to have people together. There was about 8 people, but yeah, we were here in the sanctuary, right here in front of God, right here in front of the TV where we were watching Sunday night. We watched Sunday Night Football on the screen. We watched Green Bay and Kansas City. It was great. So it was fun. It was a nice respite from all the other weird stuff, because literally yesterday I was down at the Israel consulate at 10 a.m. to talk about stuff that's going on there. And then today we're gearing up for Hanukkah. So it's a busy time. It'll be a busy time for us until probably like next Sunday. We have class next week. We have class next week, a Tuesday morning, and then the week after, and then we're off for a couple weeks. Yeah, I'm going away. I'm going away for 2.5 weeks. Yeah. To Australia, New Zealand with my wife. Yeah, we're going on a cruise for our 30th anniversary that we planned about a year ago. And it's finally here. And it couldn't come at a better time, because I want to only look at koalas and not have a phone for a couple weeks, but we'll see. But we have class next Tuesday, which would be the 12th, and then the following Tuesday, the 19th, and then we'll be dark the next couple of weeks. All right.
You're not gonna be here for Christmas.
Not here for Christmas. It's true. Yes. I'll be in the middle of nowhere, seriously, in the middle of nowhere on that. Cause it goes from starts in New Zealand and it goes to Australia, but there's like a couple of days you're at sea and there's you're in no place. And I think that's where we are for that time. So we're looking forward to it. it'll be in the summer too. I get a couple extra weeks of summer. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, and hopefully, yeah, it's, yeah, and fly out of, to Sydney. So yeah, we're looking forward to it. It's, you know, every like 5 years, we try to do something special. And so this is every 5 years.
Doing that for a while too.
So start it back up. No. All right. Okay. I'm not gonna get into it. I don't want to get involved, but she said, you gotta listen to her. So she's all right. But and where's your better half today? She's okay?
Getting a mammogram.
I shouldn't have asked, actually. I guess that's too much. Could have said the doctor. Okay, you know what? It's a good, you know what? It's a good reminder for everyone to get their mammogram. Let Phyllis's lesson be for, yes, you could have said the doctor. I didn't need to know. You could have just,
Could have said anything.
You could have said
I chose to say.
I know. I hope it's all good. Anyways, Rosemary is with us today, but Rosemary is having work done in her house, so she cannot join us online, aloud. So I'm going to be doing this, and part of the reason I'm going to do it too is because we're gonna be moving a little bit faster today, only because not really behind, but I definitely wanted to get to chapter 37, to the bones. And last week, what we left off with in chapter 33 is we left off, yeah, Judith, we should broadcast poker from the temple. Yeah, it was not that fun, let me tell you. That was fun, but I don't think people would, maybe. Actually, people watch Twitch, they're watching people play video games, so. No, but last week we were reading about the destruction of Jerusalem, which was kind of powerful. We were in chapter 33, and in the middle of Ezekiel's prophecies, he's prophesizing, he's doing his stuff, he's speaking, he's doing what he normally does. He's, teaching people these things that he's been teaching them. And then what line was it in? Sorry. In the 12th year, right here, on the 10th day of the month, a fugitive came to Jerusalem and said, the city has fallen. And you'd think that would change everything, because, or at least make the end of the chapter, a new chapter starts here, but it doesn't. And again, the chapters and verses were put in later, but there's a reason for it, which is that Ezekiel never really stops what he's doing, and he doesn't really change course right away, which I think people find it doesn't work well in the sense of the literary style, but it does work well from the standpoint of a human being who doesn't stop what they're doing, or doesn't stop their framework of what they're dealing with right away, and it takes them a while to shift gears. It's really strange that the way it happens, because it literally, he says, the city, the fugitive comes here. It's the guy runs in and he says, the city's fallen. And then it says, the next line is, now God's hand came upon me in the evening before the fugitive arrived, opening my mouth before he came to me in the morning. Thus my mouth was open and I was no longer speechless. Well, it didn't seem like he was really speechless before, but he does say that something happened to him that made what the fugitive then said enough so that he's engaged again. So it doesn't, the line before chapter 20 verse 20 is just a continuation of the thought that he had, which before that was, if people do good stuff, they'll get their reward, and it's not going to be on their kids, and it's not going to be on people if they return, that's good. If they go away, doesn't matter if they did good, they're going to be punished for going away. It was kind of like a summation of this kind of theology now, that it's not necessarily going to be a collective punishment anymore. And then the city has fallen, and his next prophecy, which is in the middle of the chapter, is where we're going to pick up. We'll take a look, and then you'll see the next chapter when it goes into chapter 34. So chapter 34, chapter 35, and chapter 36, those 3.5 chapters that we're going to read today, and then getting into chapter 37, you look at what, I mean, the city of Jerusalem is now gone. It's now not independent anymore. It's now, the king is gone, as I mentioned last week. The temple is destroyed. Everything is changed now. There is no going back. So look, that's what's happened. And you look at what Ezekiel now does. So here's the next prophecy. The word of God came to me, O mortal, those who live in these ruins in the land of Israel argue, Abraham was but one man, yet he was granted possession of the land. We are many. Surely the land has been given as a possession to us. Therefore say to them, thus said the sovereign God, you eat with the blood, you raise your eyes to the fetishes, you shed blood, yet you expect to possess the land? You have relied on your sword, and you have committed abominations. You have defiled one another's wives, yet you expect to possess the land? So those two lines, those two verses, are the response to those in Judah who would have said, oh, God made a promise to Abraham. That was only one guy. There's thousands of us, hundreds of thousands of us. God must still have a promise for us. And Ezekiel says, you broken the covenant. You don't understand. You had your chance and you blew it. So no, God's not going to guarantee you the land that was promised to your ancestor Abraham. It doesn't work that way. You broke it. Thus you shall speak to them. Thus said the sovereign God, as I live, those who are in the ruins shall fall by the sword, and those who are in the open I have allotted to the food as food to the beasts. And those who are in the strongholds and caves shall die by pestilence. And again, those are the three things that we've seen before: sword, beasts, and pestilence. Now, of course, the other thing is exile. But there's no escaping this. Doesn't matter if you leave the city, doesn't matter if you're living in the fields, if you're living in caves, you're gonna get punished. I will make the land a desolate waste, and its proud glory shall cease, and the mountains of Israel shall be desolate, with none passing through. And they shall know that I am God, that I will make the land a desolate waste on account of all the abominations that they have committed. Note well, O mortal, your people who converse about you by the walls and in the doorways of their houses, and say to each other and propose to one another, come and hear what word has issued from God. They will come to you in crowds and sit before you in throngs and will hear your words. But they will not obey them, for they produce nothing but lust with their mouths, and their hearts pursue nothing but gain. He has not stopped. It's not like, hey, the city's been destroyed, let's start thinking about the future. It is there. It is coming. But he doesn't shift gears immediately to start comforting the people. He's still telling them, this is what you're getting punished for, what you did, for what you deserved all along for these last generations. And you're going to see who he holds partly responsible for this now. And for whatever reason, like you and I wouldn't necessarily get this. He's got he has a problem there
in the land of Israel still. To them, you are just a singer of bawdy songs, who has a sweet voice and plays skillfully. They hear your words, but will not obey them. But when the predicted punishment comes, and come it will, they shall know that a prophet has been among them. Now, that's a message specifically to Ezekiel, which is the people aren't going to listen to you. They think that you're like a guy coming there entertaining them. Again, like an entertainer, like a singer, like a person who's there to perform in the cabaret. That's what they see you as. So keep that in mind. That's what Ezekiel, or at least that's what God tells Ezekiel is going to happen to him. Again, it doesn't seem, it doesn't seem at least like he's changed, people have changed. It doesn't seem like anything has really changed yet. And here's the next prophecy. And this is the problem. The word of God came to me. O mortal, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, to the shepherds, thus said the sovereign God, you shepherds of Israel, who have been tending yourselves. Is not the flock that the shepherds ought to tend? You partake of the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, and you slaughter the fatlings, but you do not tend the flock. You have not sustained the weak, healed the sick, or bandaged the injured. You have not brought back the strayed or looked for the lost, but you have driven them with harsh rigor, and they have been scattered for want of anyone to tend them. Scattered. They have become prey for every wild beast. So you see what he just did? He called out the people who should have been leaders. He called out the other other prophets. I mean, he's not even calling out the kings. He's talking to the prophets, the people back in Israel, in Judah, who have been telling people lies. And, at least according to him, have been getting rich off of it. Telling people probably, again, what they wanted to hear, which was it's going to be okay. God will help us. And he basically says they haven't been taking care of the flock. So the shepherds, that's what they are. They're the prophets are the shepherds. They should have been guiding the people. They should have been bringing them back. They should have been trying to make sure that if they get lost, you bring them back. But they haven't. Not only that, they've been slaughtering them, and they've been eating them, and they've been getting rich off of them. They've been taking their food and turning them into food and turning them into wool. So that's the problem. That's what Ezekiel is dealing with. My sheep stray through all the mountains and over every lofty hill. My flock is scattered all over the face of the earth, with none to take thought of them and none to seek them. Hear then, O shepherds, the word of God. This is to the prophets. As I live, declares the sovereign God, because my flock has been a spoil, my flock has been a prey for the wild beasts, for want of anyone to tend them, since my shepherds have not taken thought of my flock. For the shepherds tended themselves instead of tending the flock. Hear indeed, O shepherds, the word of God. Thus said the sovereign God, I'm going to deal with the shepherds. I will demand a reckoning of them for my flock, and I will dismiss them from tending the flock. The shepherds shall not tend themselves anymore, for I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it shall not be their prey. For thus said the sovereign God, Hineni ani. Here am I. I'm going to take thought for my flock, and I will seek them out. And this is God finally saying something to the people to some extent. I'm saying finally, but we haven't seen this much in Ezekiel, where God is going to fix it, and going to fix it because the leadership is done. And God says, I got to take care of them myself. And he says, Hineni, here I am. God says Hineni here now, which is really, really significant because God doesn't oftentimes say that. I mean,
this is only time he said.
I can't remember. I think this is the first time that God ever says Hineni. That God says it, where someone doesn't say it to God or someone doesn't say it to a person. Hineni ani.
Here I am. As shepherds seek out their flock when some animals in their flock have gotten separated, so I will seek out my flock. I will rescue them from all the places to which they were scattered on a day of cloud and gloom. I will take them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries, and I will bring them to their own land, and will pasture them on the mountains of Israel, by the watercourses and in all the settled portions of the land. I will feed them in good grazing land, and the lofty hills of Israel shall be their pasture. There in the hills of Israel they shall lie down in a good pasture, and shall feed on rich grazing land. So you can see, we're the flock, right? We're the sheep, the goats. We're the animals that are going to be brought back by God to pasture and to be able to live in peace in the land of Israel.
You think that's where some people get the notion that we're flock of sheep? Only to follow.
Well, the image of us being sheep and with God being the shepherd is one that it's,
Christians love.
yeah, I was going to say that's a pretty important image for Christianity, right?
Actually, Ezekiel, Christians love.
Yeah. And I think it's because he really starts out with these images of the I mean, we get them in Psalms, we get them in other parts of the Bible. We have these images of ourselves being cared for by the shepherd. Look, I mean, one of the reasons why we say that Moses was chosen to be the leader of the Jews was because he was a shepherd, right? He worked for his father-in-law, Yitro. He proved himself. The Midrash gets more into that than the Torah itself. I mean, he's pasturing the flocks when he sees the burning bush. And so, the Midrash is that, God sees that in the story, he went after a sheep that strayed from the flock, and he cared about that one sheep. He didn't want to have even one sheep not be accounted for. And God said, look, this is a guy who's going to make sure that every Jew will get to the promised land, right? He'll be a good shepherd. So definitely was looked for in the shepherds, and King David was a shepherd. A lot of these people who didn't necessarily have to be shepherds were shepherds and proved that they were going to protect the flock, so to speak. But the idea of God being a shepherd is really brought here in Ezekiel. And then, like I said, later on too, we get images of ourselves as sheep.
Sometimes sheep not being very smart.
That's an interesting one. Reverend Lynn said the sheep are not very smart. It's interesting. I haven't thought. Yeah, I know what you mean, Doreen, is that we're being led like sheep. This is definitely seen in a positive way, in the sense that you'll be fed, you'll be taken care of, you'll be in your place, you'll be in your land, which definitely is something that sheep don't seem to think about. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the, interestingly, even though, again, the Christian Bible doesn't say that Jesus was a shepherd during his lifetime, the idea of him being a shepherd, yeah, but we also call him the Good Shepherd, right? It's one of the title. I mean, there's churches called, Shepherd of the Hills. This is an image of us being sheep, being cared for by God or by Jesus, or however people had laid out who was going to be taking care of us. This idea that somebody would take care of us is seen as a positive. I mean, it's not seen in the way that we would look at it today. Like, who wants to be a sheep? Sheep get killed.
In the Bible, it's a constant theme right from the very beginning that shepherds are good guys,
Yeah.
and the cities are decadent and corrupt.
Yeah.
So they use the symbols of spirituality versus materiality.
Yeah. Shepherds are always good. Shepherds are never bad.
Shepherds, right?
Shepherds are never bad, which I guess by
David was a
extension.
shepherd. I mean, and on and on and on.
The sheep are innocent, I mean, they may be dim-witted, but they're.
Yeah, they're innocent. Yeah, the sheep are innocent. And the sheep are also, seen as kind of, they need protection. They can be taken away by animals. And so they make a good, they make a good metaphor, or a good symbol for people, because we can easily be like sheep, in a just a simple way. But what's interesting again is that there's this implication too with the sheep, kind of Ronnie's talking about, is that if you're a shepherd, and if you're engaged in that type of life, there's also this kind of implication that you're not in a city, you're not bound by, the kinds of, the
Decadence, corruption.
yes,
get a-
gossip,
material
the
stuff.
gossip, there's a simplicity about this that is like, and it's also this implied that you have enough space to have shepherds, right? If you're living in the city, you're congested, you don't have space, you don't have freedom. There's a certain freedom and kind of almost like innocence to a life like that, which is, again, like to us today, it would be, well, it was at one point, living on a farm versus living on a city, though they would have said farming was city life in those days, because that represented a move to the agricultural revolution, which again, the new historians of the world will tell you that move to the agricultural revolution destroyed humanity, because it created a hierarchy, created hierarchies, it created situations where all of a sudden you had people who were wealthy for nothing other than they controlled the means of production, and people brought them food. They also say that it also caused our diet to become way out of balance. Started eating way more grains, which I love, but way more grains, way more wheat and stuff like that than we should have been. Should be eating more nuts and vegetables, and other kinds of stuff. So yeah, they also say that it created a downturn in our bodies eating what we're supposed to be eating. So yeah, there's definitely, it's definitely been part of the way that we evaluate human evolution, or human non-evolution, if you will. So yeah, God is going to be our shepherd. I will graze my flock myself, and I myself will let them lie down, declares the sovereign God. I will look for the lost, and I will bring back the strayed. I will bandage the injured, and I will sustain the weak. And the fat and the healthy ones I will destroy. I will tend them rightly. Now, yes. So look at the note. Ancient versions read the word guard. Now, let me explain what that's about. It doesn't make sense, right? The fat and healthy ones I will destroy only makes sense if it's like, I'm going to sacrifice them and I'll eat them, or something like that. The word ashmid is the word here for destruction. Here's the issue. It's probably a scribal error. It's a scribal error. Nobody wants to say this because it means that we've been reading it wrong, or it's been written wrong for a long time, which is why they say, the ancient versions say guard. Because what happens is if this word here is not ashmid, but ashmor, shomer, right, to guard, that makes a lot more sense. And the difference between a dalet and a resh, you can't even see, right? There's a resh and there's a dalet. And so it's very easy that a little line on the back was all that it took for it to become that. So yeah, this is the problem that we have with, again, a possible scribal error, which makes a lot more sense. And that's why it says other ancient versions read guard. So what does your translations, by the way, say, Reverend Lynn?
Watch over.
Yeah. Watch over. What does yours say? Destroy. Interesting. So the King James says destroy, which follows the Jewish Masoretic text, which they tried to follow, whereas a more modern translation will take into consideration the texts where it says shomer instead of I will tend them rightly. I will take them, well, that's a little, yeah, that's a better translation. Rightly is essentially like I'll treat them according to, the right way. The word mishpat is the word for justice. It's the word, what does yours say, Mary? Judgment, yeah. So the word mishpat has this understanding of like, I'll take. No, but the issue is the implication is I will tend them rightly, which is bad translation. Don't like that translation at all. I will tend them according to. It could be understood as I will tend them according to the way they should be tended. So the ones that should be sacrificed, I would sacrifice. The ones I will take care of, I'll take care of. I'll take care of the weak ones one way, and I'll take care of these. So there's an implication like, but it doesn't. It makes much more sense that I will take care of them in justice. It doesn't say tzedakah, which is righteousness, but oftentimes they go together. That I'll take care of them. I'll take care of them in the right way, but I will take care of them in a good way. Is definitely the understanding that you kind of want if it says protect. If destroying, it's like, well, some are going to be destroyed and some are going to be cared for. So it's a little unclear, and to some extent, the way you translate that word destroy will also probably have an implication of how you'll translate the word mishpat. But it seems like he's protecting them. I mean, it seems like they're not going to be killed based on everything else here, because if he's caring for the bandaged, caring for the injured, if he's sustaining the weak ones, it seems to be like, well. Look, it's an interesting case. Like, does God only take care of those who are weak, and then the ones who are okay already will sacrifice? I guess that could be one of the ways that it was read, that the healthier ones will be sacrificed, but it doesn't seem to make sense from the context, which is, I'm there to protect you. And as for you, my flock, thus says the sovereign God, I'm going to judge between one animal, maybe. I'm going to judge between one animal and another. But let's look at what he actually says. To the rams and the bucks, is it not enough for you to graze on choice grazing ground, but you must also trample with your feet what is left from your grazing? And is it not enough for you to drink clear water, but you must also muddy with your feet what is left? And must my flock graze on what your feet have trampled and drink what your feet have muddied? So here it doesn't seem like he's killing anything, but he is going to make sure that the sheep that are stronger and that are bigger and the male sheep, they don't get to ruin everybody else's stuff, which is definitely a message to the rich and the powerful, which is you already are stronger and more powerful. You get to go wherever you want. You're going to mess it up for everybody else. It's a great image because it is a great lesson for our world too, which is how can you think it's not enough for you, that you have to ruin it for other people, that when you leave, you have to mess it up for them. Wow. So that's sheep that are not behaving in a very sheepish way. These are sheep that need to be taught a lesson. And here's God saying it again. Assuredly, thus said the sovereign God to them, Hineni ani, here I am. I'm going to decide between the stout animals and the lean. Because you push with the flank and shoulder against the feeble ones and butted them with your horns until you scatter them abroad, I will rescue my flock and they shall no longer be a spoil. I will decide between one animal and another. Then I shall appoint a single shepherd over them to tend them, my servant David. He shall tend them and he shall be a shepherd to them. Seems like, again, it's the Davidic line. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that God is going to bring back, of course, the ones who are scattered abroad. scattered far. And it seems at least some of the ones who are scattered afar, at least are scattered afar because the rich push them out. Well, that's an interesting one because it seems to imply that the people who are poor or who are less powerful were the ones who got exiled first. I mean, that's what it seems to imply. Because you push with flank and shoulder against the feeble ones.
Matches our experience. I mean, the people who fled Europe were the poor people, the rich people stayed. I mean, it's
Well, in some
it's a
cases,
generalization,
in
but
some
in my
cases,
own family, I mean, certainly proved to be true, and they ended up being fodder for the Holocaust.
is
Right?
in some cases, yeah. But in some cases, the richer people got the visas and got out. I mean, it depended. I mean, look, there's definitely something to be said for that. We've seen it happen where the rich get to stay behind.
You know, when it's 11 o'clock, the rich get their stuff together and get out. But when it's 8 o'clock and the poor people see the writing on the wall.
In the Holocaust, yes and no, because in some cases, the poor people just didn't have, like in the case of Rothschilds and other people, those people bought their way out of Europe, the parts of Europe that got run over, so sometimes it happens. In other cases, the rich people got out of one place and then they got into another. I mean, look, Anne Frank's family left Germany and went to Holland, and they could afford to resettle in Holland. Turned out to not be a good call, but they did that. I mean, it depended. There are cases though where sometimes the rich leave first, and then you're right though. The people who are rich, oftentimes who had property or who had investments in the country, didn't want to leave or couldn't leave because they felt like they were going to leave their stuff. So yes, there was definitely cases of that. I'll give you a more modern case too. And actually, they made it into a movie, a TV show, which I didn't see. But the Turkish Jewish community that fled Turkey in the 1940s and 50s, the Netflix show is about that. There's a Netflix show about the Turkish Jewish community. The community that left Turkey was primarily the less affluent. The richer folks stayed behind and still live in Turkey. The Turkish Jewish community that's still there is very affluent, very wealthy. They didn't want to leave. And it also happened in Morocco and other parts of North Africa where people kind of were given a choice. It's probably better for you to get out now. And a lot of those people stayed behind because they had assets, they had buildings, they had businesses that they didn't want to leave. I don't think that was so much the case in Iran, though. I think most of the Jews of Iran that got out were actually the wealthier Jews, the ones who came here. And I think some of the poorer ones were the ones who stayed back. There's still like 20,000 Jews left in Iran. So I think it kind of depends. I mean, in some cases, we've seen it. Anyways, in this case, for Ezekiel, the rich people definitely or some of them got to stay behind. Which is interesting because Ezekiel is one of those people that had to leave. So it kind of begs the question, is Ezekiel one of those guys that looks back at those people back in Jerusalem and goes, you fat cats back in Jerusalem, you nudged us out. You made sure we were gone first. And now, you got to stay behind. We're coming back. I mean, that's a little bit of the kind of the message here. And of course, when he says, I'll appoint my servant David over you, this is why one of the reasons why Christians love Ezekiel, because the shepherd, when it says, I will appoint my shepherd over them to tend them, the belief that this was actually Jesus is left by this line, that he will shepherd them, he will tend to them. So did Ezekiel feel that it was probably someone in the Davidic line that would continue that? Yeah, because we still say that. We still say, David Melech Yisrael, Chai Chai Vekayam. We still say it, that a descendant of David will, come back. So we still say it. But again, there's an idea that there will be a shepherd. There will be one shepherd who'll take care of everybody. I, the eternal one, will be their God, and my servant David shall be a ruler among them. I, God, have spoken. And that is a pretty strong statement that God is going to take care of this. God will make sure that David, my servant, will be the Nasi, will be the ruler. Not a king, by the way, interestingly. Doesn't use the word king. I don't want to harp on that too much, but he's a shepherd. He's a roeh, which is the word for shepherd. He's also a Nasi, which is a prince or a president. We use the word Nasi for president, but it does not say king. And interestingly, it also says servant, Eved, which is the same word for slave or servant. David is my servant, which is an important idea too, which is that, again, and those are some of the titles that, Jesus was given as well, to be a suffering servant. And here it's servant David, my servant David. It says right there, uses the word Eved, uses the word Nasi, but neither of those words are king. And you, again, use the word roeh, which is the shepherd. So those are all words that were used for this person, this descendant of David. Here it doesn't say a descendant of David, it says actually David. But unless David is coming back, himself, we would understand this to be a descendant of David, or the modern David, the new David that will come. And I will grant them a covenant of friendship. I will banish vicious beasts from their land, and they shall live secure in the wasteland. They shall even sleep in the woodland, which seems to get back to the sheep, but of course is a metaphor that it's not necessarily just wild beasts that they have to worry about, but all of those external threats. Covenant of friendship is a really bad translation because it's not the word that's used there, and it's not the word that's used in the King James, is it, Mary? And that's probably what you have too, Reverend. Yeah, I don't understand why Brit Shalom was a covenant of friendship. It's a covenant of peace. It's a covenant of security. Friendship seems to imply like we get along, we're buddies, like we're friends. A Brit Shalom is a covenant of peace. It's the fact that you don't have to have any insecurity anymore, that your covenant will be one for shalom. I will make these and the environs of my hill, which again, let's see what the note there, the environs of, I don't think it's that hard to figure out. My hill, which is Jerusalem, right? I will send down the rain in its season, rains that bring blessing. The trees of the field shall yield their fruit, and the land shall yield its produce. My people shall continue secure on its own soil. They shall know that I am God when I break the bars of their yoke and rescue them from those who enslave them. They shall no longer be a spoil for the nations, and the beasts of the earth shall not devour them. They shall dwell secure and untroubled. I shall establish for them a planting of renown. They shall no more be carried off by famine, and they shall not have to bear the taunts of the nations. Let's see what the note there is.
Gone from sheep to people.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, they're now, let's see what the taunts, because it's used in the next paragraph too, one of the next chapters. The taunts of the nations. They shall know that I, the eternal, their God, am with them, and they, the house of Israel, are my people, declares the sovereign God. For you, my flock, the flock that I tend, are human, and I am your God, declares the sovereign God, Neum Adonai. So there's the line, right? So Reverend Lynn just said, they go from sheep to human. Yes. You're Adam, right? You're Adam, you're humanity. So, it's kind of imply, like, he's like, did you really have to tell us that we're the sheep? But it's beautiful because it says, I'm God. They'll know that I'm God. And the relationship is with God and the people. So the shepherd definitely has a role to play. The shepherd is there, but the implication is the shepherd is doing God's work, right? It's a servant. He's the shepherd. So it's a nice image. It's a nice kind of like feeling that God will protect us, that God will be with us. So we're starting to see it change. we're starting to see Ezekiel talk about the future. We're starting to see Ezekiel be more hopeful. Okay. Two things. One, that's not the way the chapter started. He started by railing against the shepherds who got us into the bad place in the first place, which is okay. So, he had to lay one more bad prophecy out before he started getting positive. The only thing is, as you're about to see, he's not done. So it's not like hey, we're going to come back and the shepherd's going to take care of us. God's going to be with us. We're going to be okay. We'll be back in our land. He's not done yet. So it's not so clean. It doesn't work with people in the sense that like we've changed gears and now we're opened up to a whole nother reality. So Judith said, I thought the exiles, the leaders were the ones who went in, the leaders went into exile first. Some of them did, but some of them didn't. Some of the leaders, at least a good chunk of the leadership, stayed behind. Some of the kings got exiled, right? Jeconiah got exiled, but Zedekiah was still back. Jeremiah went into Egypt. I mean, there wasn't two options. Well, the option of staying at home or going into exile is a little bit more complicated because there was also the other option of running away, which you're still in exile. You're still not in your home, but you did it on your own terms. Jeremiah didn't because he was taken by other Jews who fled to Egypt. But the people who fled to Egypt were not taken as captives into Babylonia. They went on their own into Egypt to get away from them. So there's different possibilities. I mean, again, to use the Holocaust as an example, there were people who were taken away against their will to concentration camps. There are people who fled to Shanghai. They didn't want to be in Shanghai, and it wasn't their choice, but they got to live, and they were living under Japanese authority, by the way, at the time, but they got to get out of Nazi Germany or Nazi controlled wherever. It wasn't like everybody, it was one option, but not necessarily both options were good. But there was one that was kind of a little bit more on your terms. And of course, then there was the other lucky few that got to come to America or got to come to Australia or South Africa that got out and got out on their own terms, but there weren't many. So think about it like in the sense that Ezekiel, he got exiled. He didn't leave on his own terms. Jeremiah didn't quite get to leave on his own terms, but at least he got to go not to Babylonia. Though he didn't like it. But let's assume that most people who went to Egypt, that's where they wanted to go. And then there were the people who stayed behind. So here's chapter 35. And this is why it doesn't fit chapter 33 and chapter 35. Let's look at it. The word of God came to me. O mortal, set your face against Mount Seir and prophesy against it. Seir is,
That's where he saw it.
yeah, it's Esau. It's the Edomites. And again, he calls him Ben Adam. He says, go prophesy against the Edomites. Now, we just had him, he did a whole bunch of prophecies against the Phoenicians, against the Egyptians, a lot against the Egyptians, against the other people on the other side. Now he goes to get the Edomites again. And this is like, it's here, but it maybe belonged 2 chapters before. I don't know, but we'll read it and then kind of maybe explain why it is where it is. Say to the Edomites, thus said the sovereign God, I'm going to deal with you, Mount Seir. I will stretch out my hand against you and make you an utter waste. I will turn your towns into ruins, and you shall be a desolation. Then you shall know that I am God, because you harbored an ancient hatred and handed the people Israel over to the sword in their time of calamity. the time set for their punishment. Surely as I live, declares the sovereign God, I will doom you with blood. Blood shall you pursue you. I swear that for your bloodthirsty hatred, blood shall pursue you. So this is the curse that we have, that God just cursed the Edomites with, which is you took part in the destruction. So you could say, why is it here now? Because Ezekiel knows, and we know, and the people who were there know, and we'll read it in other prophets, especially the prophet Obadiah, it's one chapter and it's just about the Edomites, just about it. The Edomites participated in the destruction of Jerusalem, participated with the Babylonians. The Babylonians used them, as an army, as troops, and they went nuts on Judah. And Ezekiel says you're going to be held accountable for it. Because you did this, you're going to be punished. Now, Ezekiel gives away the secret, which is you've hated us all along. You've hated us for years, and you took it out on us now. So Ezekiel tells us why. He tells us that this is not a new hatred. You've hated us for a long time. And for a long time, Edom was a vassal state of Judah. They had to pay taxes. They had to essentially, live under Judean administration, if you will. And so when given the opportunity to hit us, they did. So
Are they the same as the Idumeans?
yes, Herod's people. So what happens to the Edomites afterwards is that they do have some rough times. It's not like they got to ascend after the Babylonians had given them this opportunity to take out their hatred against us, which you could understand why the Babylonians maybe would have done that. I mean, look, to use the more modern equivalent, it's using one group against another group by letting them. I mean, we do it all the time as Americans. We do it we do it with tribal groups, in countries that we've done it. I mean, it doesn't work so much for Israel or modern Israel, but it works well with countries that have vassals that are looking for a time to get back at the controlling party. It happens in tribal situations in countries all the time. And look, to some extent, it happened in Yugoslavia. It happened in places where different groups have been either pitted against each other or have ancient hatreds, which, given an opportunity, come out. So this is what happened, and definitely the Judeans were taken aback. This was bad because for whatever reason, assuming that we treated the Edomites poorly, we didn't, at least Ezekiel doesn't think that they were ready. They were just waiting for an opportunity to kill us. But that's what happened. So that's why this is so hard. And it's not the only prophet who rails against the Edomites. But again, as Ronnie reminds us, King Herod was a descendant of these people. There are no people that identify as Edomites anymore. The Edom has been completely subsumed by the Arab world. And even before that, even before the Arabs, they were completely subsumed by the Nabatean culture and by the proto-Arab culture that lived in Jordan by the time of Jesus. The Idumeans disappear. King Herod is a descendant of the Idumeans. He is from those people. But within a generation or two after King Herod, nobody really identifies as Idumean anymore. They're literally the Nabatean Empire, the people that lived in Petra kind of took them over, and there's no people anymore that say they're Idumean. Interestingly, the Idumeans were forcibly converted to Judaism, and one of the only cases we've ever heard of people forcibly converted to Judaism. So King Herod's grandfather was forcibly converted to Judaism, and it did not work out well because we got King Herod out of it. So it was not good for us.
Between Rome and the Edomites, because of Chabad, they associate Edom with Rome.
Yes, it's not just Chabad, right? It's based on Midrash. It's based on traditional Jewish understanding that Edom was the representation of Edom becomes Rome.
Right.
Edom also becomes then the church. When the Rome becomes Christian and the church is now Rome, it becomes the same. It's a little bit more complicated than King Herod is the link, because what the Romans represented for Israel, or during the time of Jesus, the Romans don't exist really on our radar until the time of the Maccabees. So there's never a discussion about Rome in the Bible at all. Rome never appears. The Greeks appear, but not the Romans. They were not significant during the biblical period. There was nothing. It was a nothing. It was a city that didn't even make it into the Bible. But by the time of Jesus, obviously, the Romans are a powerful empire. They're growing, right? Because Julius Caesar lives a generation before Jesus. So what happens is that the Jews see the Romans not so much as King Herod, even though he liked the Romans. They see them as the antithesis of what we are. And they really saw the Edomites. It's an interesting thing. When they start calling Rome Edom, it's really weird because there is no other than King Herod, and it's not really, King Herod doesn't say he's Roman. He never says he's Roman. The Jews saw the Romans as the flip side of who they were. And they saw Jacob and Esau as the flip side, as the twins who were opposites of each other, right? So one twin is exactly the opposite of the other. And in an interesting way, the Jews saw the Romans as the opposite of who they were, value-wise, right? Their culture was completely the opposite. Jews were supposed to be spiritual people. The Romans were physical people. It was literally like everything that the Romans valued, that's what was the opposite of what we valued. And so it became the flip side of the same coin. What was crazy about it was the audacity of the rabbis to even say that the Romans were the flip side of us, because we were a tiny little outpost, a nothing in the Roman Empire. We didn't.
Yeah, but the Romans carried the Greek culture in a militaristic way, and Hanukkah and the Maccabees was all about fighting Greek culture.
Yeah, but what's interesting is that
And even during the time of Jesus, I mean, they were speaking Greek, they weren't speaking Latin.
correct, but the Jews didn't associate Edom with Greece. They associated it with the rabbis associated it with Rome. Now you're right. It was Greco-Roman culture. It was Hellenistic civilization in a new form. But the Romans themselves, the interesting thing about the Jews and Greek culture was the Jews recognized that within the Greek culture there was a philosophy and there was a spirituality to it that they could, and also to some extent because they were mentioned in the Bible and because we had identified Greece already, and the Aegean culture was something that we knew in the biblical period. What the Romans represented, and it's not like they didn't understand that the Romans spoke Greek and had the same gods and stuff like that, but what they saw in Rome was a whole different philosophy of how you look at people, which is different, to some extent different than the Greeks. What they saw in Rome was a power that must come from God. And it's weird because like they could have said the same thing about Alexander the Great and the Greeks, but they really saw it in the Romans, because what they saw in the Romans was literally everything that they had seen in the Greeks, in the Persians, in the Babylonians, every empire that came before them. The Romans had perfected a level of administration and a level of physical authority that the Jews had never seen before. And the rabbis recognized it. The rabbis recognized that this is not something that happens unless God wants it to happen. And so they really saw what the Romans did as that must be God. God must be behind what the Romans are doing. In a way that they saw with the Babylonians and as well to some extent. And that's why, you know, like, that's why Vespasian in the Midrash takes on a role almost like Nebuchadnezzar, that God must be behind that. God must have, and they don't have that as much with Alexander and with the Greeks. The Greeks, I think they kind of saw it as something, you know, very powerful, but they didn't see it on a theological level like they did with the Romans. And so for them, Rome essentially became Esau, right? Rome was Esau because Esau was part of God's plan, right? Esau was a son of Isaac. He was a grandson of Abraham. God had a plan for him. And he's in the rabbis inserted Rome into our stories by making him Esau. And so the prophecies against Esau, the prophecies against Seir become prophecy. This prophecy in particular becomes a prophecy against Rome.
Right.
And again, that's where I would say it's not necessarily against Christianity, though once Christianity and Rome became identical, sometimes Edom is the church. I mean, there are later texts where the rabbis are clearly not talking about the Romans, they're talking about the church. But they're talking about it from the standpoint of the power that the church has, they have an army and they have this, but that's not the main part of their Edom. Edom is Rome because God made them like that, and they are necessary in God's plan. But the audacity is that like the Romans and us are equal. We're on both sides of the coin, which is to me, tiny little country, and we're the flip side of the Romans. We're the counterbalance to the Romans. And the weird thing is that in a weird way, the rabbis were right. Because thousands of years later, especially in this country, the struggle between those two forces in us as Americans and as, to some extent, as Jews or Christians, we struggle with that. And that's why the whole render unto Caesar what is Caesar's is a good question, because we still deal with that in this country. I just taught the kids yesterday or Sunday at Hebrew school. I showed them a Roman coin. I showed them a Jewish coin from the Maccabean period because I want them to know that these stories of the Maccabees were real. These were real people. But I showed them a coin for the Maccabees, and the coins of the Maccabees have wheat on them or an anchor, or they never have a person. There's never a bust of the king. There's never a god on the coins. You'll see Apollo, you'll see different gods on the Greek and Roman coins. And on the Roman coin, I showed them a coin from Vespasian, the Roman emperor who destroyed Jerusalem. Vespasian's coin has on one side a bust of Vespasian, on the flip side the Roman eagle. And I promise you, if you looked at that coin, you would see the quarter that's got the bust of George Washington in a very Roman way, and on the back an eagle. It's the same coin. And you look at it and you're like, oh my gosh. And then you look at a shekel coin today in Israel. There's a lily on one side, the lily of David, and on the other side a 1 for the 1 shekel. You literally will see the value of that. And again, the reason is in Judaism we believe you couldn't put a person on a coin. You can't turn them into an idol. But it's a really interesting thing that the Romans, like, that's still part of our culture. If you go to Washington, D.C., you see Rome. But is the message there that we're like Roman, or is it that we're still following the way of Jacob? Are we following the way of Esau, or are we following the way of Jacob? And it's a big issue for Chabad. Well, it's not a big issue. They use that language all the time to this day. So yeah. So they see Western culture. I'm gonna say they, but Chabad will talk about Western culture in terms of it still it's represented by Edom, by Esau. So Western material culture, power culture, to some extent Western ideals and Western values are Edom. Jacob is on the other side. Yaakov is on the other side. I had a Chabad rabbi once come up to me, and we were back in the discussions about and going before I'll never forget this, discussions about charter schools. And the rabbi said to me, the Chabad rabbi said to me, because we were talking about charter schools, and he was saying to me, he was saying to me, it's very important what you're doing because you're dressed like Esau. You're Jacob dressing as Esau, but you're really doing Jacob's work. And I said, I understand what you're saying. I said, I don't think you understand what I'm really trying to do, because I'm not trying to do what you think I'm trying to do. But he was basically saying that I'm dressing up as Esau, but I'm really Jacob, which is what Jacob does.
The problem was that the Goyish world saw you the same way.
Correct. But it was very interesting that he saw it that way, and he put it in those terms. That and the famous story, right, of Jacob dressing as Esau in order to trick his father into getting what he wanted. That I'm somehow trying to trick the government into getting what I wanted. It was not my agenda at all. So it was very strange that people saw it that way. And again, as Ronnie says, there were also people in the Gentile world who thought that's what it was, but like they didn't understand it. They didn't get it because they put it into terms that they would have thought that was the goal. Because there's too many people that assume that, and if there are Jews who want to do this, and they're a minority of a minority, that we want to apply that we want to apply a religious standard to education or to culture. And we don't. I mean, I don't. Actually, we don't. I don't. But there are people who assume that as a religious person or as a religious, as a leader in the religious community, that's my goal. And it's not my goal. It's the furthest thing from my goal of my value, which is to make people follow my way of life. But it's that they assume it. So they assume that that's what my agenda is. And unfortunately, there are some Jews who have that, I guess, in the back of their minds too. But I like it's funny when it's funny. It's not funny at all. It's sad that people have that. But this idea of Esau versus Jacob still exists.
That's so strange. I mean, the little contact I've had with the evangelical community, and I apologize.
Oh, don't apologize to me.
Through my son Corey, that's how they think.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what I was.
That's exactly how they think. And I mean, one of my best friends, who's a Baptist pastor, beautiful, beautiful man, but I mean, that's his agenda. I love him, but that's his agenda. When
Yeah.
I asked him,
I think you're, yes. I think it's people oftentimes apply their own values and their own agenda on what they think your agenda is.
So when I asked Mike, I mean, you've known me for so many years. Do you really think I'm going to hell if I don't accept Jesus Christ in my life? He says, I pray for you every day, Ronnie. I said, I can live with that. He prayed.
Yeah. Well, Esau, again, to think about that, and there are people who've written articles about it. Esau and Jacob, the value clash for us on that is one that, look, I don't subscribe to it in the sense that, I believe that there's a war going on, but I do believe that Jacob and Esau, that the when we find peace between these two, there's actually a guy who wrote a book a few years ago called Rebecca's Children, which was kind of a treatment of the Midrash and also kind of like our mentality as Jews about, balancing this off, because I think that, the Greco-Roman world has given us a lot of great ideas and concepts too, that we have to say, look, those are important as well. So I think there's an interesting balance that needs to be made. I don't think they need to necessarily be at war with each other, but they definitely need to be balanced, because if we're going to use those images of spirituality and the material world and a culture of the physical body and also the spiritual, the spiritual well-being, that you need to have both. This is one of the things that, again, that allows people who are very religious, especially in the Jewish community, not to care for their physical health, because they say, look, we're Jacob's children. We study, we need to study Torah, but I'd say you also need to take care of your physical body and exercise. and take care of, take care of your body as well. So, you shouldn't just read things that were made by Jacob. You need to read stuff that Esau wrote too. So I think the balance of the two is hopefully the thing that we're trying to get to, which is that if we're two sides of the same coin, you can't destroy the other side of the coin. The coin, we need both sides. But that's the Rebekah's children. Like, we'll be fine when Jacob and Esau are not fighting each other anymore, and there's not that hatred, because the hatred didn't work. They decided, again, when they were given the opportunity, to destroy us. And what's the point? I will make Seir an utter waste, and I will keep all passerby away from it. I will cover its mountains with the slain. Those slain by the sword shall lie on your hills, in your valleys, and in your watercourses. I will make you a desolation for all time. Your town shall never be inhabited, and you shall know that I am God. Because you thought, 2 nations and the 2 lands shall be mine, and we shall possess them, although God was there. Surely as I live, declares the Lord, sovereign God, Adonai, right? Neum Adonai. I will act with the same anger and passion that you acted within your hatred of them, and I will make myself known through them when I judge you. Wow. You thought that 2 nations, you could have both of them. Which, by the way, implies that Esau gets to have its own nation, by the way.
Now, what's interesting is that people get judged here on earth in this cosmology. It's not judgment after death.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not just-
After
It's not
death.
judgment after death, like,
Yeah,
the
you-
day of judgment. It's right here in the here and now.
You're going to get it. You're going to get it, Esau. Your land will get it now. You shall know that I, God, have heard all the taunts you uttered against the hills of Israel. They have been laid waste. They have been given us as prey. That's what you said. That's what you said, Esau. And you spoke arrogantly against me and multiplied your words against me. I have heard it. Thus said the eternal God, when the whole earth rejoices, I will make you a desolation. And as you rejoiced when the heritage of the house of Israel was laid waste, so will I treat you, the hill country of Seir, and the whole of Edom. All of it shall be laid waste, and they shall know that I am God. So those 15 verses directed at Esau, and directed at Esau to some extent. And why is it here? Because it just happened. Because Esau just took advantage of Israel's destruction to do this. Were they included in the original one? No, because a few chapters ago, we read about all these other nations that got condemned for 6 chapters. They weren't listed. They got listed now. And to some extent, it's because of what they did. I mean, you could say they would have been left alone. If you'd stayed out of it, you would have been left alone, but you didn't. You took advantage of it. You took advantage of the situation, and now you got destroyed. Now, you could say why that's there. This chapter, chapter 36, which is a long chapter, but again, it'll take us up to chapter 37, to the dry bones. We'll either get through this chapter, which I think we will, or we'll read chapter 37 next week. But let's look at this chapter because, again, let's look at its place in the text. Okay. So you heard that was, by the way, only 15 verses. And that was almost like a special little, here's Edom, here's what you get, Edom, because of what you just did. But let's look at this now. And you, O mortal, prophesy to the mountains of Israel and say, O mountains of Israel, hear the word of God. Thus said the sovereign God, because the enemy gloated over you, aha, those ancient heights have become our possession. Therefore prophesy and say, thus said the sovereign God, just because they eagerly lusted to see you become a possession of other nations round about, so that you have become the butt of gossip in every language and of the jibes of every people. Again, this taunting that you're getting. Truly you, mountains of Israel, hear the word of the sovereign God. Thus said the sovereign God to the mountains and the hills, to the watercourses and the valleys, and to the desolate wastes. and the deserted cities, that they become prey and a laughing stock to the other nations round about. Assuredly, thus said the sovereign God, I have indeed spoken in my blazing wrath against all the other nations and against all of Edom, that with wholehearted glee and with contempt have made my land a possession for themselves and for prey. And again, the note here is, I think you can get the idea. What? Greed, yeah. Yeah. No, prey. I mean, okay, so I thought, what was for pasture and prey? What is the last word you have there, Reverend Lynn?
In verse
5.
utter contempt that they might possess it in plunder.
Yeah. So God has been speaking through Ezekiel and Isaiah and Jeremiah for the last many moons, telling them that they're going to Israel, that they're going to be destroyed. The other nations are going to take part in it. And now Ezekiel is saying, yeah, that's true. And we've told you even back in Deuteronomy that you're going to become the byword for destruction and shame in other countries. Well, now it's happened. And now that it's happened, again, now that Israel has been destroyed, and again, you can see the way he said it just now, other nations, and now Edom too, because they jumped on it in it. Yes, prophesy about the land of Israel and say to the mountains and the hills and the watercourses and to the valleys, thus said the sovereign God, behold, I declare in my blazing wrath, because you have suffered for the taunting of nations. There's the taunting of nations there, that verse that they were talking about, 36:6. Thus said the sovereign God, I hereby swear that the nations that surround you shall in their turn suffer disgrace. And so this is continuation of what we read before, which is that these nations are going to suffer.
Mountains, anything other than mountains?
Well, yeah, I think they represent mountains here. Definitely represents the other nations at their peak. But you, O mountains of Israel, shall yield your produce and bear your fruit for my people Israel, for their return is near. For I will care for you, I will turn to you, and you shall be tilled and sown. So again, this is definitely a metaphor, but it also is literally saying that the country is going to come back to life, and that those hills will be able to have life again. What's interesting, by the way, is that what we learned a little bit about the topography and the agronomics of Israel is that overgrazing actually destroyed much of the land of Israel over the last several hundred years, because Israel really didn't have a regular and sustained agricultural system, that the overgrazing in the land created just a disaster for the country. And so Israel has really spent the last, even before Israel was established, Israel started trying to figure out how to repair the damage that grazing had created. So the irony is that the goats did not help. And so Israel has definitely cut back a lot on what it didn't just yesterday decide that. Israel started trying to figure out how to better manage the land so that it didn't
Most
didn't
of it
have
was
that.
trying to get back to sort of original
Yeah.
practices.
Yeah, and they're trying to get back to native species of flora and fauna. So they're trying to figure that out. Look, I just read an article. They're going to kill every deer in Catalina because the deer are destroying the. So we try to make things nice, but sometimes we make them bad but look, Israel's had a little bit of a challenge because the only people who are still shepherds are Bedouin, And they're trying to figure out how to allow Bedouin to continue to have a life, but at the same time, they're trying to help them also be educated. And it's a tough situation because they don't want them to live on a subsistence nomadic life, but at the same time, that's their way of life. So it's a tough dynamic in parts of Israel, but it's not a big problem. It's not like, definitely not the problem that they're thinking about right now. And as you probably heard, a lot of Bedouin actually were murdered. A few dozen were murdered on October 7th, just because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And yeah, they were killed right away, including Bedouin who were at the music festival. About 26 Bedouin, Arab Bedouin Israelis that were killed on that day at that festival. So I think 26, yeah. So yeah, the Bedouin are still grazing, but for the most part, we don't want grazing. We want the yield of the produce, which he does talk about, Ezekiel's talking about. For I will care for you, I will turn to you, and you shall be tilled and sown. I will set a large population on you, the whole house of Israel. The towns shall be resettled, and the ruined sites rebuilt. I will multiply human and animal upon you, and they shall increase and be fertile. And I will resettle you as you were formerly, and will make you more prosperous than you were at first. And you shall know that I am God. So this is the belief that the Jews would return during the time of once the Babylonian exile was over. And it did happen. We don't know that, again, everything that we're going to read in Ezekiel didn't necessarily happen. We're going to get to that eventually. But at least this idea that the people would be resettled is there. The whole house of Israel was not resettled, though. There were Jews that continued to live by choice in exile, including the wonderful lady we know as Esther and her cousin Mordecai. They chose to live in the Persian Empire. They didn't have to. They could have lived back in Israel. They didn't. So the whole house of Israel was not resettled there, at least not during the time that Ezekiel seems to be talking about. If he's talking about a time in the future, then maybe. I will lead a multitude, my people Israel, to you, and they shall possess you. You shall be their heritage, and you shall not again cause them to be bereaved. Well, that also didn't happen, because eventually the people got exiled again. Thus said the sovereign God, because they say to you, you are a land that devours humans, you have been a bereaver of nations. Assuredly, you shall devour humans no more, and you shall never again bereave your nations, declares the sovereign God. Well, that hasn't happened either. Didn't happen then, and it definitely hasn't happened in the last few weeks. This has definitely not happened yet, fulfilled yet completely. This is definitely still a land that devours its people. Let's see if this translation's any better. Nope. Well, that says Israel and Judah, but the implication, of course, is it's not going to happen anymore. No more will I allow the jibes of the nations to be heard against you. No longer shall you suffer the taunting of the peoples, and never again shall you cause your nations to stumble, which again is a little awkward of a phrase. To be bereaved is another word. That definitely hasn't happened lately. Nope, hasn't happened lately. Maybe it happened before. I guess we can hope it happens again. The word of God came to me, O mortal, right? Ben Adam, when the house of Israel dwelt on their own soil, they defiled it with their ways and their deeds. Their ways were in my sight like the impurity of a menstruous woman. Interesting, right? Yeah. So a menstruous woman. The Tumat Anida. This is the Nida. So I poured my wrath on them for the blood that they shed upon their land, and for the fetishes which they defiled it. So, blood, a lot of blood, a lot of blood. Blood that defiled. I scattered them among the nations, and they were dispersed through the countries. I punished them in accordance with their ways and their deeds. And when they came to those nations, they caused my holy name to be profane. It was said of them, these are God's people, yet they had to leave their land. Right? These aren't God's people. Therefore, I am concerned for my holy name, which the house of Israel has caused to be profaned among the nations to which they've come. So I'm getting a bad reputation from these people. They're going around the world and people are saying they're God's chosen people, yet they got thrown out of their land. God let them out. Say to the house of Israel, thus said the sovereign God, not for your sake, Lamanchem, will I act, O house of Israel, but for my holy name, which you have caused to be profaned among the nations to which you have come. I will sanctify my great name that has been profaned among the nations, among whom you have caused it to be profaned. And the nation shall know that I am God, declares the sovereign God, when I manifest my holiness before their eyes through you. So you've caused my reputation to go down, and I have to repair not because you're good, but because you've ruined my reputation. I need to get you guys back. I need to get you guys back to Israel. I need to make you guys look good because it's making me look bad. You're making me look bad. God is, again, concerned about his PR, which is something that Moses reminds him of over and over again in the Bible. He says, God, what are people going to say about you if you destroy these people that you took out of Egypt? You can't do it. You have to do it for the sake of your name. And we do that all the time in our prayers. We say to God, Lemancha, for your name, for your sake, God. Do it for you, not for us.
You know, that has to stand for something bigger than PR. It has to stand for what God represents in the Jewish mind. Then it makes sense.
Well, because you don't, well, wait a second. In other words,
What I'm saying is that what God's really saying here is that my value system has to be redeemed through you. Not my name, not my reputation, but what I represent in this world. Otherwise, it makes no sense to me. Otherwise, God is just another demigod on Mount Olympus.
No, well, I think it's definitely marking a transition where Jews are still feeling like people don't understand what our God represents. So I think, you know, when you're talking about a world that at least understands God or has the Bible in front of them and they read the Bible, yeah, we're dealing with a different situation today. Doesn't make sense to us today. But I think when you're talking about a world where the idea of one God is a minority religion, a minority idea, God has to, I want people, I guess, eventually to understand that there's only, you know,
But it's not just ego
Yeah,
and reputation. It's something bigger than that.
I think it's a nice way of I think it's a nice way of looking at it. I think it's a nice way of saying it would be nice if it's not about God's ego. Yeah, I mean, but again, what's the alternative, right? I will take you from among the nations and gather you from all the countries, and I will bring you back to your land, right? I will sprinkle pure water upon you, and you shall be purified. I will purify you from your defilement and from all your fetishes, because that's what the alternative is. The alternative is those fetishes. That's the alternative to God, is these fetishes. So that's part of the problem, is that they were worshiping those fetishes, that they were part of that. And I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit into you. I will remove the heart of stone from your body and give you a heart of flesh. and I will put my spirit into you. Thus I will cause you to follow my laws and faithfully to observe my rules.
There you go.
Now, that definitely, though, seems to imply that God is got to start over with us somehow, which to some extent says that God's got to fix us a little bit. A lev chadash, right? A new heart, and a ruach chadashah, a new spirit. Your lev Evan, that's your heart of stone.
But when God is not seen and is new to men, I can see that the temptation to make God in our own image is so strong.
Yeah. But God also, to some extent here, has got to fix us, which the implication of this is that it says right here, I will cause you to follow my ways, right?
There goes free will.
Yeah, we have to start over with this. And so how are we going to get this lev chadash and ruach chadashah? Is that God's gonna give it to us. God will give it to us. So we have to start again, which again, for at least the words of Ezekiel, which are pretty powerful, a new heart and a new spirit. The old heart isn't good. And again, this is God's spirit. What?
Speak to return from exile.
Yeah, but not only are the people coming home, but they're going to come home differently.
You come home.
They-
better.
Yeah, and they have to be different. What?
Will we get exiled again?
Yeah, well, that's the problem, is that but that's why, is Ezekiel speaking to the people then, or is he speaking to us today? Because,
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
so then he says, Ezekiel says, then you shall dwell in the land that I gave to your ancestors, and you shall be my people, and I will be your God. Right? So it's your ancestors that I made the promise to, but you will be my people. And when I have delivered you from your impurity, I will summon the grain and make it abundant. And I will not bring famine upon you. I will make the fruit of your trees and the crops of your fields abundant, so that you shall never again be humiliated before the nations because of famine. Definitely seems to be an issue. You have physical and economic strength, right? You don't have to worry about food. Then you shall recall your evil ways and your base conduct, and you shall loathe yourselves for your iniquities and your abhorrent practices. Doesn't mean that you've forgotten. Actually, on the contrary, right? You remember it and you're ashamed by it. So you don't forget it. It's not like you forgot, because again, by remembering it, you won't do it again, right? And you're supposed to have that sense of remorse and that sense of disappointment in yourself that you did it. So you don't forget. You don't start over with a new heart, with a new spirit, and forget what got you to the first place. It got you to the exile in the first place. Not for your sake will I act, declares the sovereign God. Take good note. Be ashamed and humiliated because of your ways, O house of Israel. It's pretty stark. I mean, this sense of shame is supposed to stay with you, right? There you go. Pretty sad. But you have to remember it. Then, thus said the sovereign God, when I have purified you of all your iniquities, I will people your settlements, and the ruined places shall be rebuilt. And the desolate land, after lying waste in the sight of every passerby, shall again be tilled. And it shall be said, that land once desolate has become like the Garden of Eden, and the cities once ruined, desolate and ravaged, are now populated and fortified. So again, the land will become like Gan Eden, right? And the cities are going to come back to life. And the nations that are left around you shall know that I, God, have built the ravaged places and replanted the desolate land. I, God, have spoken and will act. Thus said the sovereign God. Moreover, In this I will respond to the house of Israel and act for their sake. I will multiply their people like sheep. There it is. As Jerusalem is filled with sacrificial sheep during her festivals, so shall the ruined cities be filled with the flocks of people, and they shall know that I am God. Ki ani Adonai. Now here the sheep and the people become together, which is that the
Sacrificial sheep.
correct. So now the sheep are actually, the people are there as people, but the sheep are now there as sacrifices. So they've been brought together. Sheep are back to being sheep and people are back to being people. But again, the good thing is that everybody is back in the cities. The cities are back to normal. Now that's obviously a beautiful message of hope. Chapter 36 ends with this idea, or it's not just ends, but it builds up to this idea that God is going to restore us. And again, over and over again, with all the metaphors and all the imagery and everything else, the important thing to remember is the land comes back to life, the cities get repopulated, people will be strong again, but they don't forget they don't forget what happened. And God's not doing it because you deserve it. God's doing it to some extent to save his own name, for his own reputation. And because I promised the people before, I mean, this is your land. But this idea that you deserved it isn't there. Because if you deserve it, then you don't have that sense of humiliation and you don't have that sense of, we screwed up. Because if God does it and we screwed up without that sense of remorse, then God doesn't hold us accountable. And so we have to be held accountable. And Ezekiel is saying, we never want to go back to the old way. We never want to go back to this problem. And interestingly enough, the rabbis say we did not go back to that. When the temple was destroyed by the Romans, the rabbis said it was not because we were worshiping other gods. It was not because of fetishes, and it was not because of those things. It was because we were fighting with each other. Because of sinat chinam, because of baseless hatred. That's why the temple was destroyed during the time of the Romans. Because we were fighting with each other and because we hated each other. That's why. That's how the rabbis interpreted it, because they said it wasn't for idolatry. So this is God's message to us, which is we will come back. And now, chapter 37. That's what we finished with today. We got to this chapter, moved a little bit fast. I think you guys saw Ezekiel changing his tone. This chapter is, with chapter 1 of Ezekiel, the most famous part of Ezekiel. To some extent, this chapter, I would say, is more famous because, as many people have pointed out, including Rosemary, who's at home, but she can't speak. Can you speak for a second, Rosemary? You there?
I can speak. I can answer for noises that might come from outside.
All right. So, Rosemary, what did you tell me about chapter 37?
I told you that Dem Bones was one of the first songs I ever learned.
Yeah, and it's one of the most famous images or metaphors or kind of symbolic prophecy or imagery that we have in the whole Bible, because it's so graphic. It's so
One of our mandated readings for the Great Vigil of Easter.
so, as Reverend Lynn said, this is part of the Torah portion for the Episcopal Church. And I have a feeling, again, along the billions of people who have read this text over the years, as we read it right now, it's inspired people and it's given them a sense of possibility, though it's one of the scariest things to read.
Not for children.
It's not for children, no. And that's why most children haven't read this, though I guess there was a time when children were taught the song of Dem Bones, but so here is Dem Bones, and it begins right away. with-
Ezekiel connected Dem Dry Bones. I learned that song when I was a kid.
And this is, it goes right into it. God's hand came upon me. I was taken out by the Spirit of God and set down in the valley. It was full of bones. Now, that tells us right away this is a valley of bones. The problem we have is, where is Ezekiel when this happens, right? Ezekiel is in the land of Babylonian Empire when this happens. We assume he's at his home, but it says that God took him. And God set me in a place. And it says God led me around them, all around them, and there were many of them spread over the valley, and they were very dry. That's the dry bones. They're bones and they're dry. You got it. Okay. I was asked, "O mortal, can these bones live again?" And I replied, "Oh, my sovereign God, only you know," right? Which is a great answer for God. When God asks you something, you ask God back, right? I don't know. You know, God. You know. And I was told, prophesy over these bones and say to them, "O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord." That's the song. Hear the word of the Lord. So he gets to do the prophesizing. He gets to actually speak the words, Ezekiel. Thus said the sovereign God to these bones, but again, through him, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live again. I will lay sinews upon you, and cover you with flesh, and form skin over you. And I will put breath into you, and you shall live again. And you shall know that I am God.
Okay, so now I have a question for Reverend Lee.
I don't know.
I got into a conversation with a Christian. We talked about the unique aspect of the resurrection. I said, no, it's in Ezekiel. Nothing new about resurrection here. And I don't remember what his answer was.
I'm gonna agree with you.
That's terrible. I wanted to know the answer.
I happen to,
So here's the challenge. So Ezekiel speaks to the bones for God. And he says, I prophesied as I had been commanded. And while I was prophesying, suddenly there was the sound of rattling, and the bones came together, bone to matching bone. Well, that's where it gets kind of freaky, kind of frightening, but the bones start coming back together. So he had to say it. Ezekiel is the one who says it. He says, as I prophesied, I did exactly what God said. I started speaking to the bones, and they started coming back together. I looked, and there were sinews on them, and the flesh had grown, and skin had formed over them. There was no breath in them. Then God said to me, prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, O mortal. Say to the breath, thus said the sovereign God, come, O breath, from the four winds, and breathe into these slain that they may live again. So these people were killed, by the way. It says they were killed. Okay? Doesn't say they died, by the way. It says they were killed.
isn't that implied there?
Yeah, but these weren't people who randomly died. These weren't people who died of old age. These were people who were killed. These were people that were murdered. And the wind, by the way, comes from the four winds, right? Which are Baruchot, which are the four winds of the world, right? Which, by the way, shows us that even by the biblical period, this image of four winds, which you see, of course, in the Greek mythology, was already part of our understanding too. Four directions, four winds, four seasons later on. Again, the seasons are represented by the winds. What?
And maybe.
Yes. If you think about this, the winds are coming from the earth to some extent. I mean, they come from God, but these winds in particular are the ruach, are the winds that are gonna, it's the same word, right? The breath and the four winds. The word ruach is the same word. He's been using the word ruach over and over again. So the winds and the breath, the same word in Hebrew. And spirit, yeah, it's the same word. It's this, that's why, like, they're translating it in different ways, but it's the same word. The four winds is also ruchot. It's the four breaths, the four winds, the four spirits. So come into them, right? Come into the bodies that they may live again. I prophesied or prophesied, and as I was commanded, the breath entered them, and they came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast multitudes. And I was told, O mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up. Our hope is gone. We are doomed. So, lest there be any lack of clarity, Ezekiel does this several times, which is, I'm going to actually tell you exactly what these represent. Not that we really needed it.
Ronnie's question really see that your friend's answer may have been, this is not resurrection, but rather a metaphor. Whereas many Christians, especially evangelical Christians, think of the resurrection as a literal thing, that you were dead and now you're alive.
Look, it seems to be here in the text that this is 100%. I mean, he says what it is.
Right.
It's not one person. It's not a physical. It's the house of Israel. Now
I'll ask him.
but it becomes a problem because, again, this is the first time that we've seen in the Bible a body be brought back to life. It doesn't seem like this is anything other than a metaphor. I mean, in all fairness, it doesn't seem like this is what happens or is supposed to happen or is what God is going to do to everybody eventually. You don't get that from this because not only is it's somewhat closed up by his answer of, these are the house of Israel. This isn't just a random guy. It's not like people are normally going to be resurrected. This is an answer specifically to those who say, and who might have used these words, our bones are dried up, our hope is gone. And so what Ezekiel did is actually, and God told Ezekiel to do, is play off of that. Play off of those people who say our bones are dried up. You say your bones are dried up. This is what God's going to do with those dried bones. He's going to bring them back to life. And so when the people are saying this, I think they were really saying this. I think they were really saying our bones are dried up. We are so far away from being able to be in our land. We are like a skeleton that's not even a skeleton anymore. We're a bone here, we're a bone there, we're a dried bone. There's no sense of like we're fossils. There's not even a way to reassemble these bones. There's no way for us to come back. There's no way for us to be brought back together because what happens in the vision is the bones get reconnected, right? Which means the bones find each other, which means they come back together, right? The people come back together. The people are reassembled like the bones, right? Doesn't say, I mean, the point of this is that bones that are all spread out all over the valley, all over, are now finding them, they're reconnecting and they're becoming an organism again. And what specifically tells us that this is about the restoration of exile is that the four winds are the four directions. People are coming from every direction to be there. It's not just that there's.
So it's the resurrection of Israel, not the resurrection of an individual.
It's clearly that. And not only that, he said that's what it is. It's not like a mystery. He said.
We know that the temple follow this because the people are again one.
Yeah, well, it is. It's not immediately after, but it's the last 6 chapters of Ezekiel is all about the rebuilding of the temple. But
How long we were in exile the first
about 70 years.
That's 70.
Yeah, so about one lifetime.
Right.
So what's interesting is that people are already saying there's no way for us to come back from exile because we are like dried bones that are we're dried up, where there's no way. So we're dead bones, we're dried up bones. Not only did the bones come back to life, they were brought back to life and reassembled from all over the world. And then that energy from all around the world helped reanimate them. That's the weirdest biblical prophecy that was redone in the modern Israel and that's why when people say, well, this is the resurrection, I'm like, well, this is not really that's not, I mean, I get it. I mean, you can interpret anything, but that doesn't really seem to be what's at the face of it and what he says it is. And it's one of the reasons why when we really think about it, which the mind blower of mind-blowing biblical prophecy is that's what the Holocaust was a literal valley, dried bones of what we saw in the camps. And that's why when you see the juxtaposition of those bones from the ovens, as they were literally still murdering Jews, that those bones were reassembled in Israel, and that literally part of the energy was bringing together people from around the world, that the energy was people from, North Africa and from Iran and from Turkey and from every part of Europe and every part of the world, that energy from the four corners brought those bones back to life. So when you go to Yad Vashem or you go to a place in Israel that remembers the Holocaust, you see those bones and you're like, that's the dry bone. That was where people said, how did those people who exited the camps, and some of them literally walking skeletons, come back to life? And one of them was, I mean, you met her. She was here. Eddie, Wendy's and Eddie's mother, Mina, who died last year, almost on this day, on December 3rd. November 23rd was her. She died at her yard site. She literally came out of a concentration camp and went to the camp, was taken and put in a camp in Cyprus. Was it a DP camp, a concentration camp run by the British, which is where she met Eddie's dad. I mean, she came out of there as a skeleton, the only one of her 5 people in her family, her 2 sisters and her parents, that were alive. She came out, according, as Eddie said, as a skeleton. So the fact that people were able to literally have their bones come back to life in Israel is just, it's unbelievable. So that's where, like, you think about the prophecy being not about one person, but about about Israel coming back to life from the 4 corners, from the 4 winds.
All y'all's all about when you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that the air, the wind from the 4 corners is exactly there. Prophesy therefore and say to them, thus said the sovereign God. Yeah, it's a little too hard to read. I'm going to open your graves and lift you up out of the graves, O my people, and bring you to the land of Israel. Yeah.
I mean, that's what happened to Jesus, right?
Yes, but it happened in our lifetimes.
Oh yeah,
But it happened in our lifetimes.
I would say no, Ron. No, not for me.
But it's also,
you know,
it's,
the resurrection.
but wait, I want to make it really clear. It's so not about one person, because the words are plural every time. Every one of these words are plural.
It's a metaphor.
It's clearly a metaphor. It's clearly plural. You shall know, O my people, that I am God, when I've opened up your graves and lifted you out of your graves. I will put my breath into you, and you shall live again. And I will set you upon your own soil. Then you shall know that I, God, have spoken and have acted, declares God. we're going to leave it off there right now because this is the end of that part of the Valley of Dry Bones. I mean, it's the next prophecy has a, we don't have to, we will get into it next week, but that's the prophecy that this next prophecy is from chapter 37:15 is a different prophecy. That those first 14 verses are the Valley of the Dry Bones. And again, I think you saw today that it is a prophecy for a whole people. It's a prophecy for a nation, and it was never, I don't think it was ever intended to be directed at one person or one body that is going to be resurrected. And it never seems to be, to me, anything other than a whole lot of people being resurrected, not as a from literal death, but from a place where they didn't think they could ever come back from. And
Is this where Maimonides got the idea of resurrection?
no, he didn't get it from this. He got it, we got it from this, but we got it from by the point of time of well, here's what I believe happened.
Mhm.
There's the text here in Ezekiel, and we get to a point in time where I don't think Ezekiel's responsible for this. I think people put it on. I think they foisted this concept of resurrection on Ezekiel because he does talk about bodies coming back to life, but he's clearly talking about it in a metaphorical sense. There was a period of time when Jews were exposed to other types of philosophies and beliefs about death. One of those was that, and the reason why I don't think it was Ezekiel is because after Ezekiel wrote this, it's not like Jews started burying themselves in ways that imply that this happens. When they start doing it is about 300 years later, when Jews start burying themselves in ossuaries where they would collect the bones and bury them in a box after the body's decomposed. That implies that there's going to be a physical resurrection of your bones. I don't think it really has to do with Ezekiel. It has to do with a belief that physical resurrection would happen and that you need to have your bones together in order for that to happen. Ezekiel talks about bones coming back to life, but there were philosophies, there were beliefs of burial and resurrection, which Judaism took from other faiths and other traditions, including, Greek ideas and Persian ideas and, other ideas from the Middle East, and started believing that, look, the way we know they believed it is because of the way they buried themselves. The proof is in the burial practices. When people move to that burial practice, and we know when they moved to that burial practice, because we can carbon date when they started making ossuaries. They didn't start making ossuaries in the 600s, in the 500s. They did it 300 years later. If they believed in the physical resurrection of a body, then they would have started burying like that then. I mean, I don't know how else to say it other than this is not this might have become a proof text for resurrection, but it doesn't seem that that's the way he intended it to be. That's what I'd say about Ezekiel, about this section, which is sad because people, I think, then don't understand it for what it is, which is a beautiful, powerful, visual, graphic image of the Jewish people. You think they're done. You think there's not enough for them to come back to life, but they are going to come back to life. There's enough of them that they will come back to life. There's enough of them that they will eventually and miraculously, to some extent, reconstitute themselves in the land of Israel. And that's what it's really about. So the fact that people get obsessed with whether this will physically actually happen to somebody, it still has ramifications. I mean, look, this is why there were people running around Israel a month, 2 months ago, picking up every single piece of flesh and every single bone so they could be buried. It's why people who were blown up in their cars, as you might have read, were buried in their cars so that they could be resurrected one day
as much with their physical body as they could. People believe this. I mean, people literally in Israel still believe it. What?
The Orthodox?
Oh.
Curious Joel, yes, in New York.
They give a crash on the interstate where I live, and it's a Jewish person. Curious Joe comes out and collects everything.
Yeah.
Orthodox or?
Yes.
It's a soccer village.
Yes.
7 miles from where I
But
live.
because Israel wants to comply with Orthodox law, that's why they've allowed people to do things like bury the entire cars. That's what they did. They buried entire cars a month ago, 2 months ago, so that the person's entire body could be buried because the cars were burned out and they're not sure what was human remains.
Resurrected them as car drivers.
I guess I don't want to be resurrected in my car, but I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, like the mentality is that
Go out by the car now.
yes, but it's also why, unfortunately, some people look. I don't want to laugh at it, but because it's actually serious, because it's one of the reasons why
You know,
people don't do organ donations. The way some people don't. Most Orthodox rabbis have also ruled that they should.
Frown on cremation.
Correct, or frowned on cremation, but the concept of saving a life overrides Nivul Hamet, which is desecration of the dead. So that's why most Orthodox Jews have allowed it. Plus, in almost all cases, at least now, the part of the body that gets transferred is sinew, that's not bone. So one can make the argument, as long as the bones can be kept together, it doesn't matter so much whether your eye or your heart or that other part, because God's going to give you a new one of those anyways. That flesh all melts away anyways. So that's the kind of the good news, but it has led to some interesting explanations of bodies being buried wholly. And of course, again, why some Jews refuse to be cremated, because it was considered to be Nivul Hamet, which is desecration of the dead, which we're not supposed to willingly do. And if we do it, we have to do it under extenuating circumstances, which is why, again, people also say you should not perform an autopsy unless it's absolutely necessary. But again, other people have ruled that if it can help catch a criminal or if it can help cure a disease, that it should be done because it overrides the need to be buried completely intact. Anyways, that's on a happy note. Everybody should be healthy and join us for Hanukkah activities so that we will feed our body with latkes and with more food so that we tomorrow night we're finishing the book of Deuteronomy. On latkes? Well, you're a right reverend canon. Don't you have the authority to institute that? What level do you have? Do you have to be like the Archbishop of Canterbury in order to? Well, Reverend Lynn, we consider you very close. So, happy Hanukkah, everybody. We will finish Deuteronomy tomorrow, Devarim. Well, we finish it, but then of course we never really finish it. But we'll come to the last reading of Deuteronomy tomorrow night, Wednesday, and then we celebrate Hanukkah Thursday night. So join us. We're going to light the menorah out in Stevenson Ranch on Thursday. At least some of us together, if you can make it at 7:00 on Thursday, we'll light that menorah and light your menorahs. We had to get new candles. We realized we ran out of candles. So all of a sudden it came on us. So Judith asked, when do we read Ezekiel, the Valley of Dry Bones? It's a very interesting question. When do we read it? Does anybody know? She's asking what Haftarah, what week do we read it?
Judith still exists?
Judith is there. Judith, are you there? Judith, did you leave already?
No, I'm here. Hello.
Yeah. Hey, Judith.
Oh,
So Judith wants to know when we read Ezekiel 37. It's a good question because we don't read Ezekiel. Wait a second. We don't read Ezekiel a lot, right? We read Isaiah a lot, a lot. But we don't read Ezekiel a whole lot. We do read Ezekiel chapter 37. And Mike jokingly said, yes, he said, is Easter. We actually read it at Passover. Kol HaMoed, Pesach. So this year or this past year, we read it on, here, I'll show you. Last year, we read it on April 8th. We read this on the third day of Passover, Chol HaMoed. This is Chabad's custom. So some customs are different. But yeah, we read all the way to chapter 4 to verse 14. All right.
So what do we read on Tush B'Av? I would think this would be really good for that.
It would be good. Except on Tisha B'Av, we don't get comforted, unfortunately.
Oh,
You know, we should, but we start comforting ourselves after. And that's when we start reading, we read the Haftarot of comfort from Isaiah, actually. Yeah, the 7 Haftarot that are the Haftarot of consolation that go from Tisha B'Av right after the Shabbat after Tisha B'Av to the Shabbat Nachamu to Rosh Hashanah. And that's when we start to be comforted by the words of Isaiah. But yeah, no, this is a very descriptive one. It's one that really causes us to I don't know if the right word is hope for a better tomorrow, but it's scary. And it's definitely, as Mike said, it's not for kids. I think it's interesting that we've turned it into a song, right? I think it's interesting that we gosh,
It's from a people who were desolate and oppressed. It's a Negro spiritual.
yeah. And I think, yes, it gets to a point where one could argue that when you live a horror every day, then it becomes comforting to know that or the worst thing that you can imagine is is going to end up being okay, and the nightmare becomes hopeful. Here, before we go, because we're not going to make Rosemary sing it, but
Written 1928, I read.
really,
Yeah.
You know what's interesting? What's interesting
Wrote
is
it? Who wrote it?
do we know who wrote it?
Yeah. I have it on Facebook.
Somebody actually wrote it? Really?
The melody was composed by author and songwriter James Weldon Johnson and his brother J. Rosemont Johnson.
Huh.
It was first recorded by the famous Myers Jubilee Singers in 1928.
Let's see if we have a version of that. Let me see if we can have Myers Jubilee. You said Myers Jubilee. It seems like it would be older than that, right?
It says here it was composed by James Weldon Johnson and his brother J. Rosemont Johnson.
He didn't hear you. So let's just see. Let me just see if James Weldon Johnson is he the guy who wrote all the or is that a different?
Wrote lots.
Yeah, isn't he the guy that wrote Lift Every not Lift Every Voice? Yeah, right. So he wrote lots of stuff. So here's the this is not, hold it a second. I guess this is not, hold it a second. I guess this is not the let me see.
Ezekiel connected them, dry bones now hear the word of the Lord. With your toe bone connected to your foot bone connected to your heel bone connected to your Ankle bone connected to you. Your leg bone connected to you. Knee bone connected to you. Thigh bone connected to you. Hip bone connected to you. Backbone, your backbone connected to you. Shoulder bone connected to you. Neck bone, your neck bone connected to you. Head bone, I'll hear the word of the Lord. Them bones gonna walk around. Them bones gonna. Them bones gonna walk around. Now hear the word of the Lord. Disconnect them bones, them dry bones. Disconnect them bones, them dry bones. Disconnect them bones, them dry bones. Now hear the word of the Lord. With your head bone connected from your neck bone connected from your shoulder bone connected from your backbone.
All right. So there, you've got, you got the bones. All right, everybody. Thank you. I apologize that Rosemary didn't get to read today, but thank you, everybody, for being there. All right. Take care, everybody. Happy Hanukkah.
Thanks
Happy
a lot,
Hanukkah.
Rabbi.
See you tomorrow night. Bye-bye, everybody. You feeling better, John? There you go.
No,